In 6 days, one man threw 3 complete game shutouts in the World Series, 27 innings, not a single run, and in more than 100 years since, nobody has come close. His name was Christy Mathewson. And before he was a legend, he was something baseball had never really had before, a gentleman. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand what baseball was in 1900. It was a rough, disreputable trade. Players were drinkers and brawlers, tobacco-spitting drifters who jumped contracts and ran with gamblers. Respectable families warned their sons away from the ballpark the way they'd warn them off a saloon. The game was popular, but it was not respectable. Then came Mathewson. He was tall, 6'1", broad-shouldered, with golden hair and a jaw made for a poster. He was a college man from Bucknell, in an era when almost no ballplayer had ever seen the inside of a university. He'd played football there, joined the literary societies, sang in the glee club. His mother had wanted him to be a preacher. He carried a piece of that with him his whole life. He didn't curse, he didn't drink during the season, and he refused, flatly, on principle, to pitch on Sundays, no matter what the pennant race demanded. The newspapers called him the Christian gentleman. His teammates called him Big Six. And something strange happened. Mothers who had forbidden their boys to go anywhere near a ballgame suddenly relented, because here, at last, was a ballplayer they could hold up as a model. Christy Mathewson made it acceptable to love baseball. But he wasn't beloved because he was polite. He was beloved because, on the mound, he was almost inhuman. He threw a pitch that few men alive could throw, the fadeaway. Today we'd call it a screwball. It broke the wrong way, curving in on right-handed hitters when every instinct told them it should curve away. Batters swung at a ball that seemed to change its mind in midair. And Mathewson placed it wherever he wanted. He had the mind of a chess master, a famous checkers and cards player who could hold whole games in his head, and he pitched like one, setting hitters up 3 pitches in advance. He almost never walked a man. He seemed, at times, to simply decide how an inning would end. Beside him stood his opposite in every way, John McGraw, the New York Giants' snarling, fighting, umpire-baiting manager. The gentleman and the brawler became inseparable. McGraw even took the young pitcher into his own home. Together they built the best team in the National League. By 1905, Mathewson was the finest pitcher in the game, and the Giants were its finest team. That October, they met the Philadelphia Athletics for the championship of the world. What happened next has never been matched. The 1905 World Series was a pitcher's war, and Christy Mathewson turned it into a coronation. His opponent was no pushover. The Athletics were run by the great Connie Mack and had bruised their way through the American League all year. This was only the second World Series ever played, and the whole country was watching to see which league, which city, which style of ball was truly supreme. The Giants took the field in menacing all-black uniforms McGraw had made specially for the occasion. And in the middle of them stood Mathewson, about to author the greatest single week any pitcher has ever had. Game 1, in Philadelphia, he took the mound against the Athletics and shut them out. 9 innings, 0 runs, 4 hits. The Giants won. He should have rested for days. Instead, 3 days later, he pitched Game 3, and shut them out again. 9 more innings. 0 runs. 4 more hits. Then, on just 2 days' rest, in Game 5, he walked back out and did it a third time. A complete game shutout to clinch the championship. Add it up. 3 games in 6 days. 27 innings pitched. 14 hits allowed. 1 walk. And 0 runs. He didn't just beat the best team in the other league. He erased them. Understand how impossible that sounds today. Modern arms are guarded like priceless machines. A great pitcher might throw 20 innings across an entire October and be called overworked. Mathewson threw 27 shutout innings in less than a week, and 120 years of baseball has never produced its equal. It may be the most dominant performance the sport has ever seen. He was 25 years old, and he was only getting started. Over his career, Christy Mathewson would win 373 games, a National League record that still stands to this day, tied but never broken. He won 30 or more games in a season 4 times, including 37 in 1908. In 1908 alone he pitched more than 390 innings, a workload that would be unthinkable now. His earned run average across an entire career sat at 2.13. He struck out batters by the thousands in a dead ball age when strikeouts were rare, and he did it while walking almost no one. He carried the Giants to pennant after pennant. For the dead ball generation, he was simply what greatness looked like. For more than a decade he was the face of the entire sport, living proof that a hero could be clean, that the game itself could be noble. He co-wrote a best-selling book. Boys copied his high, easy wind-up in the street. And when his arm at last began to fade, he moved to Cincinnati to manage. He had done everything a ballplayer could do, and done it with a grace the rough old game had never known. And then, at the very height of his fame, with nothing left to prove and no earthly reason to risk a thing, Christy Mathewson volunteered to go to war. In 1918, the United States was deep in the Great War, and Mathewson, 38 years old, wealthy, famous, and completely safe, did not have to go anywhere. He went anyway. Friends told him he was mad. He had a wife, a young son, a fortune, and a place in history already secure. None of it moved him. He was commissioned a captain in the army and shipped to France, assigned to the Chemical Warfare Service, the branch that trains soldiers to survive poison gas, the ghastly new terror of the trenches. He wasn't alone in that work. In the same service was Ty Cobb, the fiercest competitor the game had ever produced. 2 of baseball's greatest legends now spent their days teaching frightened men to strap on a gas mask before the fumes reached their lungs. And it was in one of those drills that the story turns dark, and here the historical record turns murky, and honest historians admit it. The most repeated account, one Cobb himself later told, describes a training exercise with real gas in which a signal was missed and men were caught with their masks off. Mathewson, by that telling, breathed in a dose of it. Other versions place the exposure elsewhere, or blame the sickness that was everywhere in those camps. What no one disputes is the result. His lungs were damaged, and while he was overseas the great influenza pandemic was sweeping the army, killing more men than the bullets did. Christy Mathewson came home hollowed out, coughing, gray, a shadow of the golden athlete who had left. Within 2 years, doctors handed him a diagnosis that in 1920 was very nearly a death sentence: tuberculosis. He went to Saranac Lake, high in the Adirondack Mountains, where the tubercular came to breathe the cold clean air and fight for their lives. And Mathewson fought his illness the way he had always pitched, quietly, patiently, without complaint. Some seasons he seemed to rally. His name still carried gold, and he even returned to the game he loved as president of the Boston Braves. He was building his way back. But the lungs never healed. On October 7, 1925, Christy Mathewson died in bed at Saranac Lake. He was 45 years old. He reportedly told his wife, Jane, to go outside and have herself a good cry, but not to make it a long one. That very afternoon, hundreds of miles away, the World Series opened in Pittsburgh. Before the first pitch, the players of the Pirates and the Washington Senators filed onto the field wearing black armbands. The flag flew at half-staff. A packed stadium stood in silence for the fallen gentleman, the man who had made their rough game respectable, gone on the very day the sport he defined played for its title. Grantland Rice, the finest sportswriter of the age, mourned him as the greatest character the game had ever produced. Here is why it still matters. 11 years later, in 1936, baseball opened its Hall of Fame and chose the first 5 men ever to enter it. The names: Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Honus Wagner, Walter Johnson, and Christy Mathewson. He is the only one of those 5 who was already in his grave. He never knew he'd been made immortal. Now think about what he actually changed. Before Mathewson, baseball was something decent people looked down on, a game for drunks and cheats. After him, it was something a president could love, something a father could take his son to without a trace of shame. He didn't just win games. He made the game respectable enough to become the national pastime. Every clean-cut star who ever smiled on a cereal box, every child ever told that baseball builds character, stands on a foundation a preacher's son from Pennsylvania quietly poured a century ago. He threw the most dominant week any pitcher has ever thrown. He walked away from comfort and safety when he had already won it all. And he paid for it with his life, in slow, shortening breaths, in a cabin in the snow. So here's the question. We build monuments to the men who hit the ball the farthest and played the longest. But how do you measure a man whose greatest act, a war he never had to fight, is the very thing that killed him? Follow for more.